feels like they're trying so hard to get those numbers up so fast. And they're saying yes to everything because they want to be able to do it all. And nobody can do it all.
Everybody, we have got Steve Nedvidek here, former head of innovation at Chick-fil-A, and David and I are just so excited to have you on the show. How are you doing, Steve?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me, Devin. It's a pleasure to be with you. It's a pleasure to be asked.
Absolutely, man. I am so excited. So David, to give a little background, Steve and I both know a mutual friend who also worked at Chick-fil-A. Actually worked for Steve for many years. And I asked her to be on the show, and she's like, "I got somebody better." And so
she would be great if you can get her. She would be great.
I told her I still want her to come on the show. She is a design thinking maven, and she and I've done some work together, and she's super impressive. So I still want her on.
That's the mark of a good human being, though. When you get asked to do something, and you're like, "Listen, I might be all right, but there's somebody better." That's the mark of a good person.
Absolutely. So I just want to make sure that our audience is abreast of kind of who you are, Steve, what you've done. Kind of tell us your origin story.
Wow, origin story. Yeah, really quickly, I guess. Originally from Detroit, moved to North Carolina when I was a kid. Went to Wake Forest University for my master's in theater, so I have my degree in theater of all things, which was, much to the dismay of my parents, like, what are you going to do with that? But it turns out that I was able to parlay that into a 30-year career at this little chicken company in Atlanta called Chick-fil-A. And, I was working on sets with actors and writing scripts and designing logos and designing corporate events. So had an awful lot to do there from an artistic and creative side. Wound up being in marketing for about 16 years and headed up creative services there. Worked on the kids meal program, worked with celebrity raving fans and local store marketing, and worked with Chick-fil-A operators and helped with the cow campaign. And then moved over. My last 8 years were working in the newly formed innovation department. So I was part of a team. I was responsible mainly for the socializing of innovation, so the teaching, the coaching, the training, and had to learn design thinking, had to get spun up on that really fast, and helped build an innovation center, so I know how to do that. Retired early, which was fun, and then went back to my alma mater at Wake Forest, and now I teach a class once a year. Class in design thinking and a class called Arts and Innovation. And I'm teaching another class that's going to be brand new this fall. I live in Atlanta. I love film. I love, good television series. I'm a graphic novelist, so I've finished a graphic novel trilogy that has nothing to do with selling chicken and nothing to do with leadership, but everything to do with anarchists battling action heroes after World War One. And I've got a granddaughter who's 2, and I like to travel. And I'm the president of a nonprofit in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And just life is full, man. What can I say? It's the best season of life for sure. I highly recommend retirement if you can get it. It's a good gig.
That is awesome. I definitely want to touch on pretty much all of that. So I'm going to try to start at the beginning here. How did you wind up working at Chick-fil-A to begin with?
Yeah, I started working at Chick-fil-A as a team member when I was getting my undergraduate degree. I was at a school called a little school in Chapel Hill that I stayed at for a year until I ran out of scholarship money, and then had to come home and start to work my way through school. So got a job at Chick-fil-A behind the counter, and worked in a Chick-fil-A restaurant for 6.5 years. So was going to school full time, working full time. Would come back during the summers when I was getting my master's, and work, and just enjoyed being at Chick-fil-A, enjoyed serving the guests, and cooking the chicken and all those things that making coleslaw, making lemon pies that we used to do back in the day. But mainly it was just because the operators, the franchisees, they were just good people, and they were the best people to work for. And so once I got married and I got my degree and I started working in other jobs, I realized that there was just no place as good as Chick-fil-A, from the standpoint of no place that treated me as well as Chick-fil-A did. And one of my operator friends said, "Hey, you need to sign on with Chick-fil-A corporate. You need to be on staff there." I was like, I was working as an art director for a small agency at that point, and it just kept calling me. It just kept beckoning me to put in my application, and I did in summer of '88. And then by October of '88, I had moved with my new spouse from Greensboro, North Carolina, to Atlanta, and I started what I had no idea was going to be a 30-year trek through chicken land. Just an amazing opportunity to work with this fella named Truett Cathy, an amazing opportunity to see his leadership and the leadership of Jimmy Collins, the former president of Chick-fil-A, to be a part of something that I was proud of, to be a part of something that, was a little tiny regional chain, just a few stores on the street, mainly mall stores, and to be a part of that from that level up, seeing the development of this behemoth that is out there now that, kind of owns the world of chicken. So
David, I don't want to hog it, man. You look like you got a question, man.
No, well, I mean, listen, we could talk about that for the hour. So I don't let me go too far. We won't get to anything else. I mean, first of all, super fascinating that it was really the time that you spent in the restaurant, really interacting with franchise. I just always I think that's such an interesting way of understanding, like, no, this is the place that treated me the best, and that's worth more than people think sometimes. In fact, it's worth everything at times. So I think that's really fascinating. I'm just kind of curious, because you were there throughout that growth period, especially out of the Southeast and moving beyond, out of just, shopping malls and all the rest. I mean, was there a moment that you guys had where it was like, all right, we're going big, and for the next 5 years, here's this crazy growth plan? Or what was it, just we're just going to keep doing what we do, and the more people like it, the more we expand, and we just take it organically?
yeah, great question. Truett used to have a saying, and it's something that I'm sure anybody of my era could reply back to you with. Anybody that worked at Chick-fil-A during the '80s and early '90s would know this. You know, Truett honestly believed that if you got better, you would get bigger. And he
Yeah.
was always afraid, maybe the wrong word, always reticent to go down a path of scaling the organization, of building tons and tons and tons of stores. He was okay with methodical growth. He was okay with slower growth, and he knew if the company focused on getting better, that the customer would want it to get bigger, and that the sales would follow, and that we would be able to get bigger. So we didn't really concern ourselves in the early days with how many stores we could build, or at least most of us didn't. There might have been some, in different parts of the company that were concerned about that.
Somebody with a
But
clipboard somewhere might have.
yeah, so somebody that wanted to see that happen. But for the most part, Truett and Jimmy did a great job of, just kind of helping us to see what was the most important thing. Dan Cathy used to always say, keep the main thing the main thing. And the main thing was just getting better and satisfying the customer, and and having a positive influence on everybody that came in contact with Chick-fil-A. So yeah, I think when we hit $1 billion in sales, which was the year 2000. It was a big milestone goal for us, and it took from 1967 to the year 2000 to hit an annual sales of $1 billion. And then I think 5 years later we hit it again, and then
Yeah.
3 years later we hit it again, and then 2 years later and we used to mark these big celebrations of hitting $1 billion. And I don't know how frequently they do it now, but probably once a month they just click on another $1 billion, and I don't even know if anybody knows anymore.
Wow. That is incredible. I want to make a T-shirt out of that saying. If you make it better, it'll get bigger.
Go for it. Just make sure you put Kathy's name underneath it.
Yeah. We'll give some royalties.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm curious about when you talk about some of that ethos when you were starting out. I love that sort of focus on actually getting better in order to get bigger, in order to earn the right to be bigger. In a day of talking about unicorns and trying to rush to the $1 billion valuation. I think that is just it's so refreshing, and it is focused on serving the customer, which I think is excellent. How did that affect you as a person?
Yeah, I think for me, especially now looking back and consulting with other organizations who, many of them are tech organizations that I've done some consulting for in the past, and it feels like they're trying so hard to get those numbers up so fast, and they're saying yes to everything because they want to be able to do it all, and nobody can do it all. You have to be focused on your lane, on your piece of the pie, and you have to do that really well. And it always used to concern me when, for example, an advertising company would say, or an advertising agency would say, "Oh yeah, we're good at everything." I was like, "That's baloney. You're not good at everything. You can't be good at everything, and you probably shouldn't be good at everything." Truett wanted to be good at a few things and do them really, really well, and became known for that. And that was the hallmark of Chick-fil-A. I mean, when you went to a Chick-fil-A, whether you were in California, and this was the late 80s, early 90s. If you were in Racine, Wisconsin, you went to Santa Monica, California, or wherever you were, he wanted you to have the same experience. The coleslaw needed to taste the same. The lemonade needed to be just there. And so people began that journey with us of talking about how much they love the lemonade, how much they love the chicken sandwich, how much they love what we were doing with kids meals, and how we're trying to be mom and dad's favorite versus, we couldn't play the Disney game, right? Let McDonald's and BK do that. We were trying to educate kids and trying to build character and stuff, do different things, counterintuitive marketing. And so we used to say in the marketing department all the time that we couldn't outspend the competition, we had to outsmart them.
Mm-hmm.
And we spent a lot of time thinking about how to outsmart them and how to do things that were really different. Cow campaign being a perfect example of that. That's a whole podcast, in and of itself, about how that took an idea of 3D billboards, which was an idea that was only going on in Southern California and Orlando because of the theme parks, and make that more of an everyday occurrence by introducing these characters that became the cows, standing out from your competition. You don't have to outspend people in order to make yourself better. And that's what I think a lot of businesses miss today, especially these startups that are trying to, get to a certain valuation by a certain time so that they can cash out, and they want to do everything, and they're burning up people as they go, and they're leaving a legacy that's not going to last like Kathy's legacy. So you have to determine what kind of leader you want to be, and what kind of follower you want to be, and what kind of person you want to be, and you need to know that probably in advance of going into and joining up with an organization. Because if you're not wired like they are, you won't be there long. You won't, and that was kind of the hallmark of early days at Chick-fil-A is we all knew why we were there. Um, and that's what made it so special.
I was going to ask a question about innovation in that context, but I'm going to hold off on that for a second because what you just said, super interesting. You certainly, you were there for 30 years. Clearly, you felt like there was great alignment for yourself personally, being in that environment, following those individuals. Just given how well defined that was at Chick-fil-A, and I think, I mean, that remains true today. There are a few brands that have done, or organizations that have done as good a job as Chick-fil-A at establishing that and holding on to it. Are there a lot of people that show up that don't stick around because they realize that it's not a good fit, just because of how well defined it is?
I would say a lot is probably not accurate. There are some that get in the door, as with any company, that get in the door and go, yeah, this isn't going to be for me.
Yeah.
There are some that get in the door and the organization says, yeah, this isn't going to be it for us.
Exactly.
So it's a two-way street. But I think for the most part, at least in the early days, there was a certain whimsy to Chick-fil-A. I mean, we were the weirdos in the mall that wore the bow ties and the striped aprons and handed out pieces of chicken on toothpicks and spun the spinning wheel and you know just did all kinds of crazy things. And most brands weren't like that. And that all
Yeah.
came from Truett. I mean, Truett was he was a fun lover. There is no other way. Just fun, fun, fun. Took his business seriously, but didn't take himself seriously. Too many leaders today take themselves way too seriously. Truett Cathy used to say that the reason that he invented the chicken sandwich was because it was an easy idea. He said if it had been a hard idea, I wouldn't have been able to do it. Because remember, Truett, he was not an educated man. He, grew up in a boarding house and, sold
Yeah.
newspapers and Coca-Colas and Saturday Evening Post as a kid and, went to the military in World War II and came out and started a small diner. I mean, he knew that he wasn't an academic, right? And so he was doing the simple things that were meaningful to people. And for us in those early days, it was about taking care of guests, taking care of customers, having a positive influence, doing the simple things, being those crazy people, and being okay with that, and not taking ourselves too seriously and doing what we needed to do in order to, to advance the cause of the brand. And people seemed to enjoy it. People would get on airplanes with, when we were flying and we'd have Chick-fil-A ties on and they would remark about our ties. And, at first it was the tie that had the lemonade on it or the waffle fries. Oh, I love your lemonade. Oh, I love the waffle fries. And then, gradually over time, it became, oh, I love your service. How did you guys get in? Where do you find those people? So the brand began to kind of morph and change and shift, but continue to get better in different ways. So I tell my students all the time, you have to know who you are. Spend some time thinking about who you are. Spend some time thinking about what you want out of life and who you want to associate yourself with. Truett used to say, you'll be the same person now as you are 10 years from now, except for the books you read and the people you associate yourselves with. We all have a lot of stuff, Truett said, wrapped into our brain. And we will until we die, because he was intentional about making sure we remembered this stuff.
That is incredible. There's real quick, I want to kind of touch on something that you said. People would ask you, where do you find these people? I have a hunch that it wasn't just you guys finding people. I would love to know what you would consider the answer to that question.
I think the answer is truly the franchisee system at Chick-fil-A and the local operator and the way that works well for our brand. And I'll still say our brand, even though I don't work there anymore. It's still, I'll bleed peanut oil till I die. The operator's ability to get into the local community, to build their team from the ground up, to live in the area that the restaurant is in. That was always a big concern. in the early days. Truett did not want a system whereby a franchisee could live in another state but have 50 restaurants, like in 3 states away. He wasn't interested in that at all. In fact, for the longest time, it was one operator, one restaurant. Mm. One operator, one restaurant. And that was it. And that was all. When we first had the operator with 2 restaurants, that was a big deal. That was game changing. That was paradigm shifting, right? And then forget it when you had one operator and 3 restaurants. But even now today, and I haven't been out for 4 years, you won't find operators with 10 restaurants, with 5 restaurants. Keep it tight. Keep it tight. And so when you have somebody who lives and works in that community, when you have somebody who goes to church with people that they're working with, or somebody whose kids attend the same schools as the people in their neighborhood, or somebody that knows who the local vendors are, it makes a big difference. You create this community feel, and that's what Chick-fil-A does best. I think if you were to say what's the secret sauce to finding the people, it's the operators' ability to cultivate within their community the best relationships, find the best people, know that that's where their families live, know that these are your neighbors, and to act like neighbors. And the guy that's the operator, on Sunset in Hollywood, he's got to know his neighborhood, and he does know his neighborhood, and he knows them very well, and he knows where to find people. And the guy who's the operator in Cary, North Carolina, knows his neighborhood. The woman who is the operator in Conyers, Georgia, she knows where to find people. So it's an amazing patchwork that works for Chick-fil-A. And that's where you find those people. It starts with the operator central in that community. And finding people has always been the number one thing to do. It's not just now. Now is extremely hard, right? But finding and keeping, retaining good team members has always been like the number one thing on operators' lists for years and years and years. So they make it a priority. It's not enough to just have warm bodies. You have to have the right bodies, and they're willing to wait for them. Because when they come in the door, they know that they'll stay.
That is amazing. I just, folks, you are getting some truth bombs right here. This stuff is incredible. David, go ahead, man.
Well, no, it's crazy. I'm just thinking of, so I live in Richmond, so it's not New York, right? So I'm not going to pretend like, there are 10 billion people living here. But I was just thinking as you were talking, Steve, I actually personally know there are 4 Chick-fil-A's kind of in the main area here, and I know the 4 families that own all 4 of them. Like, as I'm thinking through it, like 2 of them through school, 1 of them through church. Like, it's just, yep. But it's like, right? Yeah, I guess I know everyone that's a franchisee of Chick-fil-A here in town. But which is crazy to say because I literally could not say that about any other restaurant, anything here in town. So I'm going to go back to the innovation thing for a second. I'm just really curious, especially as you're kind of laying out, from a culture standpoint and even from an operating standpoint. All of this stuff is in place. Clearly, it's worked very, very well. When you're the person that then has innovation in their title, that means a lot of things. You mentioned working with some, startups on the software side. And a lot of times, especially now, innovation means it's got to be completely different. It's got to be off the wall. It's got to be all these things that basically, pivot or change the direction of where things are headed. I'm going to make a wild assumption that a Chick-fil-A innovation didn't mean changing all the bedrock stuff. So how did that function? It's very interesting to me to think about that concept in the context of a Chick-fil-A where so much is working and, whether it's a product innovation or a strategic innovation, how did you think about that part of the business in relation to the fact that things actually were working really well?
Yeah, gosh, that's just such a rich question with a lot of different ways that those answers, those tendrils can go. Let's just say that back in the 80s and 90s, when we were small and when we were just in malls or getting out into the street, consistency and excellence were the hallmarks of the company. Hence, being able to go into different Chick-fil-A's through the nation and kind of have the same experience, have the same menu. I mean, it was a really big deal that, we wanted to have sweetened tea in, in New York or in, Pennsylvania or wherever we were at the moment. So to maintain the continuity of the brand, consistency and excellence. And so when you think about those two things, you think about who do you hire in order to make those two things happen. You tend not to hire innovators, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You tend to hire people who are really good at executing and really good at getting large amounts of work done.
Yep. I think operations 100%.
Operations, absolutely. And we had a very, very strong field operations department. Working with operators, making sure the recipes were right. We even used to joke that when President Chick-fil-A, Jimmy Collins, would come into your restaurant, Jimmy would invariably pull out a spoon and he would go, a little tiny spoon, and he would go and he would check the coleslaw. That was Jimmy's, that was it, silver spoon. It's going to either match the right taste or not. Consistency and excellence. The world began to change, and it began to change rapidly. Other areas of growth, other businesses were being developed. The internet was booming. It was coming on, and cell phones were being. It just, the last 20 years have been like equal to like the 200 years before. Just amazing growth. And when you need to have and find answers to new challenges, consistency and excellence doesn't matter so much. That's not important, because it still is. But you have to do the wisdom of the and, right? You have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. I had one friend at Chick-fil-A that used to say we went from being the hunter to being the hunted. Because as you're growing, then you have to start changing. Customers with their cell phones have more access to social media, and they're able to talk about you more and talk about you faster and take pictures of things that they shouldn't be seeing, in your restaurant and uploading them. And, you have brands that are just coming right after you, and they're copying everything that you do. You have a restaurant that's built for $2 million in sales, and you got to figure out how to get $4 million in sales out of it annually, because the systems aren't there. So we had to learn how to innovate. And David, to your question, nobody knew what that was.
Yeah.
We were kings of continuous improvement. We had a culture of continuous improvement, tweaking the bolts, which was appropriate for that time. But when the vehicle began to get bigger and faster, the wheels start to shake. And so we had to figure out new ways to do things. And that's when you bring in people who are ideators and innovators, and people who are analyzers, and people who can, take new ground. And you have to have a place for them to do that. And you have to have systems for them to do that. In fact, when I went from marketing to innovation, I asked 50 of my friends, I tell this story to all my classes. I asked 50 of my friends at Chick-fil-A, what does innovation mean? Because we're getting ready to stand up an innovation department. What does innovation even mean? 50 friends, I got 50 answers. No common language for innovation. I asked them, do we have a culture of innovation? 50 people, basically one answer. The answer is no, we do not. We have a culture of continuous improvement. We don't have a culture of innovation. Okay, so why or why not? 3 big reasons. 1, don't know how. I don't even know what it is. So how do I even know what to do? So which means that we have to have definition. We have to have process, things that we need to put in place. Number 2 was, I don't have time. I'm too busy, with all this other stuff that's going on. I don't have any bandwidth, margin. I always say, innovation equals margin plus opportunity. You can't have just opportunity by itself. You have to have margin to chase. And we had no margins, people with no margins. And then the third reason, which I think was the most concerning, had everything to do with culture, is people were afraid to innovate. They were afraid to get the wrong answer. And while consistency and excellence is very, very good, an unintended consequence of those two things together is perfectionism. Mm. And people who are perfectionists, who want to see it right every time, don't want to break things. They don't want to take a chance. They don't want to risk things. So it's very, very difficult for some folks to risk things. This is why you bring people who are, more creatively bent in, because we don't care. I mean, we'll break things. It's okay. As long as they're contained, we'll break all day long, because we know that that's what you get to when you get to the new ideas. You have to bring in different perspectives, which is why diversity is so important. I say to my class all the time, curiosity is to the individual what diversity is to the organization. I mean, curiosity makes a good innovator. Diversity makes a good innovative company. You have to have different perspectives. You have to have different backgrounds. You have to have different solutions, different understanding. Good innovation does not come from homogeneous groups, people who think the same, people who do the same things. So we had a lot to work on really fast, and had a conversation with Dan Cathy, who was, CEO at the time. And I said, Dan, this is going to take a long time to change Chick-fil-A from a continuous improvement company to an innovation company. Innovation-minded company is going to be hard. It's going to be like, a cruise ship. I said, Dan, it takes a long time to turn a cruise ship. I thought I had a really good analogy. He turned right back around at me and pointed with purpose and said, I have no interest being the captain of a cruise ship. Which means that Dan understood something that I didn't. He understood that there was a need to go fast and be nimble, and we were running out of time, and if we didn't, we would be left behind. So we had to move fast. And the good news is we did. I mean, we figured it out. We figured out what to do. We figured out how to do it. We figured out who to talk to. We figured out what to build. We taught people. We created innovators. We created innovations. We broke the mold on drive-through. We were able to open up in downtown New York City and not have lines that were a block long that took an hour to go through. We weren't Shake Shack. We were moving. Yeah. And it was a great time to just see all this stuff happen. So we were able to turn it, but you have to turn it with purpose, and you have to understand kind of what you're up against when you have to make that turn.
That's fascinating. Even just that, I mean, even kind of dialing into that realization point for the company of, hey, we're reaching a point where we're the hunted now, and that being that catalyst for when I was at Red Hat, which is definitely a company that has a strong ethos and sort of this open source concept and what that means. But they used to put on the walls, I don't actually think it's a Gandhi quote. I think it just gets attributed to him all the time, but it's the first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win, right? So it's kind of that idea of like, if you've built your bedrock properly, then the second they fight you is when you win, right? Because you have everything else in place. But it's always fascinating to hear even just kind of how that came about at Chick-fil-A. And you guys were just like, no, this is the time. Like, we're going to do this and move fast.
Yeah,
I think it's amazing.
We made a commitment to do it, but also we had support from leadership to give us the time to make sure that we were doing the right things. Too many people who consider themselves leaders are what I will call imagine launch people. They have ideas and they just want to see them done. Here's an idea, let's go do that. Here's an idea, let's go do that. And they spend their lives throwing things up against the wall. And they make messes and things are sliding down the wall constantly. And with innovation, there is a discipline to change. There is a discipline that comes when you do things properly, when you do things kind of with the right mindset and the right order. And what you're in essence doing in first part is laying the track so that you'll be able to go fast. And Dan gave us, and the executive committee and Truett gave us the freedom to be able to lay some track first to make sure that we had the systems in place that would allow the rest of the organization to catch innovation once we started really doing it. We did not just start by throwing ideas against the wall. We started by building infrastructure. And I think that's an important thing to remember. Innovation is not, it's not just about ideas. It's about the having the discipline in order to transform those ideas into business value.
That is awesome. That, in my work in consulting, spent a lot of time with companies that were either trying to start innovation labs or to try to breed a culture of innovation. And that was always one of the big challenges. How do we take this idea and operationalize it? And that was where so many companies found a struggle. And it was, sometimes what you talked about, where you have people who, they know how to make the machine work. They do not want to make mistakes. They do not want to get it wrong. And when you come and tell them, hey, we have this new thing, the first reaction is, new things cause mistakes, and I don't want to make mistakes, so get out of my office. And so how did you all overcome that at Chick-fil-A?
Well, for me, and this is just one guy's answer, right? You could ask a bunch of different people and probably get different answers on that. For me, there was a realization moment where you kind of look at who you have around you and how they're wired. And I think for us, we spent a lot of time talking about playing to your strengths. We spent a long time with managers and directors trying to get them to understand how their people were wired, so that within any group, and I found this to be fascinating, quite honestly, within the finance team, within the treasury team, groups that you would not think are innovative, within the legal team, every team has somebody who's wired to innovate. Every team does. Mm-hmm. Every team has somebody who's not satisfied with the status quo. Every team has somebody who is a what if thinker, not just a what is thinker. And I think once you put that in front of leaders of groups and say, you need to know your teams and you need to organize yourselves so that the people who are really good at executing, and the people who are really good with an operations mindset, and the people who are really good at maintaining, and believe me, I'm not one of them. I mean, maintenance for me is jumping off the roof. I'm not going to do that. At least not for long.
Over here, it's the same for me.
Yeah, I can't. No. That ain't me. But I have dear friends who are excellent at it, and that's what they want to do. I married an accountant, and I tell people this all the time. I mean, we couldn't be more different. She loves the maintenance of things, and she loves the minutia of getting in there, and and I just go, I can't do that. So if you can find those people and you can put them on the strategies and the tasks that line up for their strengths, and then you take the what if people and you line them up against long-term planning, and you line them up against taking new ground and trying new things, but they have to talk to each other. I mean, you can't, the what if people can't give ground to the what is people, and vice versa. They've got to be able to stay connected, and they've got to be able to talk and work through problems together. And so I think that for us was one of the key moments where I found the people that were doing the best job of innovating within the company. And to be honest, finance was head and shoulders above most other departments, because we had a leader in finance that said, I'm going to structure my team based upon this. Customer service. We had a leader in customer service that said, I'm going to structure my team, front-end innovation, back-end innovation. And she did. And she got great success with that. So I really, truly believe that it all boils down to making sure that you've got the right people in the right seat on the bus, so that when you are moving forward, they know what they're supposed to do, and they do that well together.
Absolutely, man. That is incredible. I think that I could probably, I could probably talk to you for 3 hours and still not run out of questions to ask you. But
Well, you have other episodes of your podcast. I'm happy to come back.
oh
Round
man,
two.
we will absolutely take you up
I
on
was gonna say,
that.
careful what you ask for, Steve.
Oh, I enjoyed just talking about it because it's great because it's life lessons, right? I mean, at this point, it doesn't. I don't get any benefit of from Chick-fil-A of talking about this stuff. I mean, it's not like they've got me on retainer and say make sure you talk nicely about us. I do because I will always bleed peanut oil, but you know, we did some things right. We screwed some things up too, but but everybody does. And it's fun when you think back at it and hopefully create life lessons that other people can benefit from. That's what it's all about for me, which is why I'm teaching it.
And the life lessons have absolutely been flowing here. I feel like I haven't even gotten into getting to talk about design thinking much. I know we're running out of time. I do want to be able to talk a little bit about this graphic novel. Kind of selfishly because I also kind of dabble in that on the side. I've tried to make my own in the past. Art is a big part of my life. I think I see the ever loving thing up there on the wall behind
You
you.
do, yeah. It's clobbering time, yeah.
That's awesome. So tell us about the graphic novel and what was your part in it?
Yeah. Every uh, I guess every journey that you have in your career has its hills and its valleys, right? There are times when you feel like things are going really well, and sometimes when you feel like things aren't going as well as you'd like. Being a creative person, I always tried to pepper some creativity and creative work into my occupation because I have to. That's what drives me. It's like pure oxygen. But at the times when I feel like I didn't have that, I look for other outputs, other things I can do. Um, I was at a point in my career where I felt like I needed a creative outlet, and knew a couple buddies that I'd known for 20 years that were kind of wired like me. And I said, hey, how would you guys feel about just joining forces and writing a book? Well, what kind of book? Well, I don't know. I got this idea for this graphic novel, which I had been taking ideas and just kind of putting them in my back pocket, like ideas like, well, why do superheroes only show up until World War II? Why are there no superheroes in World War One? I was in a musical back at Wake Forest when I was getting my master's called "Oh What a Lovely War," and it was all about World War One, and it just opened my eyes to that time frame. My buddies were like, "Yeah, there's so much technology that was going on in that time frame. And you had folks like Tesla, and you had Ford, and you had Edison, and all these Steinmetz, all these people doing work. So it's just an incredibly rich time. The world is changing. Societies are changing. Countries are coming online. Other countries cease to exist. You've got all this money running through everything. And you've got the world experiencing problems that it's never had before, and it's marching toward what would become World War II. So it's just a fascinating time frame. So we decided to write a book that had nothing to do with anything business oriented, and we took some of the real events that were happening in the 1919, 1918s, 1920s, and we started to stitch them together in kind of an alternate history narrative of what if this actually influenced this and this influenced this, and what if we created the first wave of superheroes that came out of the technology of Carnegie and Tesla and things like that. And what if we put it all in Georgia on Jekyll Island, and because that's where all the money was. And so that was their hub, that was their home base. And what if it was a story about people cooperating and people who were from different backgrounds but didn't care about that because they cared about common good, which was it feels so foreign today because everybody's split into sides. No, we're bringing people together. So we created this idea called the Jekyll Island Chronicles. We pitched it to SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design, to help us create a pitch packet for this idea so that we could take it to publishers and production companies. They worked with us. We created a pitch packet. We gave it to a small group of publishers. One of the first ones we gave it to was a guy who lives in Marietta, where we are, who said, if you guys can finish this, I'll publish it. 3 years later, we're at Comic-Con. We had book 1 published. We were ready to go. We had our friends who had the folks from LA who worked on Jurassic Park and who worked on Avatar, who built our cosplay costumes. My son is 6 feet tall and he's walking around on these big stilts, these metal legs that Andrew Carnegie has built. So we do that. It does really well. We do book 2. That one's out there. We say we're gonna finish it up and have a trilogy. So now the Jekyll Island Chronicles are a trilogy. It's from IDW Publishing, which is one of the big comic book publishing powerhouses that's out there. We're in the queue for television. They're pitching us now for TV. It's a unique story. It's a unique time. We like to describe it as what would happen if the Avengers met Downton Abbey. It's that kind of story, filled with historical characters, filled with weird facts and stuff that actually happened, and filled with a bunch of sci-fi and fantasy, and has absolutely nothing to do with leadership and selling chicken. So if you're into that kind of thing, look it up. It's available everywhere. And yeah, so that's the Jekyll Island Chronicles.
That is so cool. That is so cool.
And here they are.
Oh wow.
Book
oh
1,
man.
book 2, book 3. Just happen to have them at my fingertips.
Awesome.
The art on those is just so awesome. I went looking it up after Meg told me about that. I went and started looking it up, and man, as an artist, I'm very, very, very happy with the level of quality you put into that. It's awesome.
Well, we were very fortunate. 2 of the SCAD students that were in our class when we created the pitch packet wound up working with us on books 1 and 2. And one of them stayed along for book 3, our colorist, S.J. Miller. They stayed along for book 3. And we got an illustrator for book 3 that was a former DC Marvel guy. And boom, I mean, wow, and books 1 and book 2 look great. And book 3 is just, it's ratcheted up a bit. It looks and feels like classic Marvel comic stuff. So we're really proud of how this has all come together. Creative endeavor between three of us. We're all still friends. We all still get along. We all still talk to each other. 2 of us are going down to Dublin, Georgia, in 2 weeks on a Saturday to talk about the book. We all get along fine, but it's difficult. I mean, it's difficult to have people in a creative enterprise, working together over time. I tell people this all the time. I know why the Beatles broke up. I mean, it's just hard work. It's a lot harder than it looks. And people's lives change. So, what you sign up for at the beginning may not be what you have in your hands 5 years later, 6 years, 8 years, 10 years later. But we're still all friends and we're still working through it, and it's good. I'm so glad I did it. Now I have a granddaughter and one day I'll be able to read it to her. And if nothing ever happens, if we don't ever get on television or ever get on film or, whatever, we have a trilogy. And most people can't say that, we instead of, for me, and this is not a knock on playing golf because there are people that love to play golf, but for me, my decision was I could play golf poorly and have a drawer full of little cards and pencils, or I could do something that will be sitting on a shelf and tell a story after I'm gone. And I just chose the latter, So
I love that.
Yeah,
I love that. That's awesome. I've got similar creative pursuits on the side, and we'll have to wrap on that stuff at some point. But and Steve, this has been absolutely amazing. We will definitely have to have you back. So many more questions. I know. Both David and myself are filled with more questions for you about your adventures. David, I want to make sure that I don't close this thing out without giving you an op to say or ask, whatever else you've got.
I mean, this I'm going to ask the question, but if it's like, well, that's a long answer, then maybe we just move on from David's question. But I have to ask it, Steve, on a personal note. I just listening to you to describe, I mean, you made the joke, but I know there's some truth behind it around, if you can, the retirement game and what it means to be able to kind of structure all the things that you currently have going on in your life, and then I'm listening to you talk and just kind of your body language around describing, being able to work on the graphic novel and kind of balance that a little bit. When you think back on the time when you were still in industry and, to your point, you can fill the rest of your time with all kinds of stuff. And the three of us are probably somewhere in this, but I'll only speak for myself that like, I can't get into something without really getting into it, whether that's nonprofit work, whether that's advising other companies, whatever that is. I have a hard time balancing. Do you look back kind of, pre-retirement and think, okay, maybe there was a good framework for how to work. I could have worked more of that in or less of that in, or, just when you think about the other things that kind of buttressed all the difficulty that goes into, in your world, it was what, leadership and chicken, right? But the non-leadership, non-chicken stuff, I'm just curious if you look back and say, yeah, actually there was probably a different way to structure that, or actually it went the way that it was meant to go, and that works for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's stuff that you can control in your career and stuff you can't, right? Um, and a lot of the change that happens in any organization over time is stuff that you can't control. Leadership chooses a different direction. Leadership has a new leader. There's different strategies that come up. People, you do the shell game and people switch around from team to team. Some of that you can't really control. So there's a bit of grow where you're planted that happens there. But the stuff you can control, for me, I wished I had known when I started in October of 1988 what happiness looked like for me on the job. You know, um, got a new job, was living in a new state, newly married, new house, and then stuff happens and life happens, and you begin the mechanism of just kind of coping with, okay, where do you need to go and what do you need to spend your time on? Getting up and going to work is a process. And it wasn't until about 20 years into my career that I really started to think about what makes me happy at work. What's the right balance for me at work? Um, and I wish I'd known this. It probably would have saved me a lot of anxiety and some tears, and um, would have helped me out through some of those valleys, and maybe would have given me perspective in some of those peaks. Um, and this is my answer. This is nobody else's answer but mine. Maybe it works for somebody else. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But I found for me that there were three things that I wished I'd known that made me happy early in my career. Number one is like what you do. You have to have a certain degree of enthusiasm when you get up in the morning, the work that you're going to be doing. If you don't have that, you need to find something else to do. Right? Number two is like who you do it with. There were times in my career when I really loved what I did, but the team that I was on was no, thank you very much. Can I do this with somebody else, please? So that's very important. You can hate what you do, but you can love your team, and vice versa. And then the third thing was be useful to the organization. There were times in my career when I loved the team I was on, I liked what I was doing, but I didn't feel like on the overall, like what we did was extremely important. Mm. And so those three things for me became my checklist. Now, if all three of those levers were pulled, I was golden. I could do that for 30 years, right? If two of those levers were pulled, I would have to just figure out how long I was willing to wait and be able to shuffle those levers. If only one lever was pulled, it was just a matter of time before something major needed to happen. Yeah. And so I tell people this when they ask, what do you wish you had known then, or how would you structure things differently? I wished I would have known the truth about myself and what makes me happy at work. And again, this is just my answer. Everybody's going to have a different answer. But if you can like what you do, like who you do it with, and be useful in the organization, that will make that drive to work much easier. Of course, people don't drive to work that much anymore. But, for me, it was an hour each way. And I had to, I had to be okay with that. And I was. It was a great place for me to have a career. I worked for the best boss in the world in Truett Cathy. Worked for other great leaders that I'm very, very thankful for, and hopefully did some very interesting work that has made a difference. So anyway, that's my answer to that question, David.
That is fantastic perspective. Thank you, Steve.
Seriously, I mean, it's a fantastic answer. So I think we have a lot to take from this. Obviously, we'll get into covering some of the big points post show. But Steve, thank you so much for being on. We look forward to having you back.
Yeah, man. Thanks to both of you. Really appreciate it. Thanks, you for Steve. The opportunity. Have a great rest of your day.
Same to you.